Hey guys, tonight we're cracking open a side of medieval life that most glossy history books would rather you didn't see. Imagine the candlelit hush of a stone hall, the tapestries stirring with secrets, the scent of rain seeping under the heavy oak door. Outside, the world is frozen in the logic of honour and shame. Inside, there's a silence that feels as thick as velvet. But under that velvet, yes, you can feel it. Something festers, quietly, where the world pretends not to look. You probably won't survive this era with your modern sense of justice intact. Seriously, if you're expecting a happy ending for every unfairness, best settle in, because the Middle Ages play by different rules. So before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 a.m? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city, eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey together, here on Timeless Sleep. You can feel the echo of your own steps as you move through the musty corridors of a medieval manor, your breath soft and tentative. The walls themselves seem to lean in, pressing with secrets. Here, honour is currency, richer than gold, deadlier than any blade. Everyone wears it, stitched on their sleeves, uttered in their oaths, brandished at the dinner table as if it could ward off all the world's ills. And yet, beneath this grand word, honour, there is an unspoken pact. Don't look too closely at what happens behind closed doors. The lord of the house sits at the high table, eyes glittering with pride, his family arrayed around him like trophies. You watch the way people move, measured, deferential, careful not to offend. The honour of this household is not just its reputation. It is the invisible chain binding everyone's tongues. That chain, as you'll discover, is heavier for some than others. Let's imagine you are a young servant scrubbing rushes in the cold gloom of the great hall. You hear footsteps behind you, slow and deliberate. You know to keep your eyes down, to answer, "Yes, my lord," or "Yes, milady," to vanish into your work like smoke. Honour, they tell you, means knowing your place. But what if your place is at the mercy of another's moods? Or worse, their whims? If something happens, a harsh word, a wandering hand, an order that goes too far, you must swallow it, because speaking out would shame the house. Don't bring dishonour, they warn, as if your silence is a shield for them all. It's not just the servants, of course. Even the ladies of the manor walk the same narrow line, their every movement watched and weighed. You might see the lady of the house sitting by the fire, her hands folded, eyes following every word at the table. If she is slighted, or if her own husband's temper flares, she must bear it with grace. A single misstep, a tear, a complaint, a bruise noticed by a neighbour, could stain the family name. The price of speaking up isn't just embarrassment, it's social exile. Imagine knowing that if you cry out, your pain becomes the story everyone whispers about, and you the villain for making them uncomfortable. People say, in those days family honour was everything. They're not wrong, but what they often miss is the shadow that honour cast. To protect the reputation of a house, countless little wounds were hidden away out of sight. It's a strange paradox. The more sacred the honour, the more fiercely people guarded it, even when it meant ignoring the wounds it hid. Outside the manor in the village, the idea of honour is just as powerful. A farmer's good name means his family can trade, can marry, can survive the lean years. But what happens if a daughter is wronged? If a wife suffers in silence? The answer all too often is simple. She keeps quiet for fear of bringing shame upon everyone she loves. The blame shifts, imperceptibly but unmistakably, from the offender to the offended. Why would you say such things? What will people think of us? The victim becomes the threat, and honour, that precious, fragile thing, is restored by her silence. Sometimes even the smallest gestures become acts of self-preservation. A mother tells her child to avert their eyes, not to ask questions about the uncle who drinks too much, or the neighbour who is always too familiar. Stories are smoothed over, rewritten, or never told at all. Whole generations grow up sensing the unspoken rules: loyalty above truth, reputation above justice, silence above all. But you wonder, didn't anyone notice? Didn't anyone speak out? That's where the genius and the cruelty of the medieval concept of honour reveals itself. To question the honour of a household was to start a war, sometimes literally. Accusations could lead to feuds, to legal battles, to ruin. The law itself was more interested in protecting the fabric of society than in untangling its knots. If someone finally did try to bring a wrong into the open, they often found themselves facing not just the accused, but an entire community desperate to protect its own reflection in the mirror of public opinion. You might expect, as a modern listener, that someone, maybe a wise priest or a kindly neighbour, would intervene. Sometimes they did, but often their interventions only deepen the silence. Pray for patience, they'd say. Endure for the sake of your children. The most dangerous wounds, after all, were the ones that couldn't be bandaged. Historians still argue whether the cult of honour was more a force for stability or a mask for oppression. Some say it gave people a sense of order, a reason to behave. Others point out the trail of invisible casualties, those who learned to flinch at praise, who wore their shame like another layer of clothing. There's a peculiar little story from a French manor in the 13th century. A lord, famous for his generosity, was also infamous among the servants for his outbursts behind closed doors. One servant, who had dared to spill wine on his favourite tunic, was dismissed with a single word, but only after the lord's wife begged him not to punish her household before the eyes of the village. The incident naturally was never spoken of again. The tunic was burned, the servant sent away, and the manor's honour remained unblemished. If you visit the ruins today, you'll find nothing of the story in the family records. Just a gap, a missing name, a silence where a life used to be. Not all households were equal, of course. In grander castles, where the stakes were higher, the layers of secrecy grew even thicker. Lords and ladies knew that their every action might be reported at court, so they perfected the art of concealment. Servants, sworn to silence on pain of dismissal or worse, learned to turn invisible. Even the architecture seems designed to hide things. A warren of corridors, a door that opens only one way, a window looking out onto nothing. If you walk through these ruins in your imagination, you might hear the laughter and music of the Great Hall, but it's in the cracks and the dark corners that the real stories linger. These are the places where the concept of honour becomes almost a living thing, breathing in the hush, watching, always watching. And what of those who couldn't keep the secret? Sometimes the burden was too much. There are tales, half remembered, half whispered, of women who fled in the night, of sons who ran off to join mercenary bands, of daughters who fell ill and were never spoken of again. The price of breaking the silence was exile, or worse, a legend rewritten so thoroughly that the real person disappears from memory. Yet, as much as these stories break your heart, you can't help but marvel at the quiet strength it took to survive. People learned to find tiny ways of reclaiming their lives, an embroidered message hidden in a tapestry, a song sung just out of earshot, a prayer whispered not for forgiveness, but for courage. The silence sometimes became its own language, understood only by those who had lived it. Modern scholars are forever combing through old letters, legal records, scraps of parchment, trying to read between the lines. Occasionally they find a story, a case where someone dared to bring dishonour into the light and paid the price. But for every story that survived, 100 more were lost, erased by the very culture that prized its own reflection above the truth. You might notice, as you listen, how familiar some of this feels. The language changes, the customs fade, but the instinct to protect the group, even at the cost of the individual, lingers on. Maybe that's why these stories still have the power to unsettle us, to make us question what we're willing to overlook in the name of peace, or pride, or love. So, as you drift further into the hush of the night, Picture yourself standing at the edge of the manor's firelight, looking back at the windows glowing with secrets. You can sense the weight of the unspoken, the ache of stories buried for the sake of something called honor. And you know, even in your own quiet room, that the past is never as far away as it seems. The journey is just beginning. That word, honor, will take on stranger shapes as we travel deeper into the shadows of history. But for now, let the flicker of candlelight soften the edges of your thoughts, let the silence settle, and let yourself wonder. What would you have done if your pain was someone else's shame? You leave the manor's chill corridors behind and step out into a world painted with banners, bristling with the sound of hooves on packed dirt and the glint of steel in sunlight. The very air shivers with expectation, because here in the heart of chivalry's golden age, everyone is watching. A tournament field blooms with colour, knights in gleaming armour, banners snapping, noble ladies in towers waving handkerchiefs that seem to promise something both sweet and impossible. But as you draw closer, you start to sense the quiet lie behind all that spectacle. Chivalry, the famous code, the shining armour, the poetry and pageantry, was supposed to be the cure for every social ill. Honour above all, they say, and protection for the weak. Yet under the shine, the very rules that promised safety were the same ones that drew the line between who was protected and who was simply decoration. Your senses fill with the tournament's bustle, squires rushing with armour, the metallic tang of weapons being polished, the murmur of bets exchanged beneath the stands. At first, it's easy to be swept up in the show. A trumpet blares, 2 knights lower their lances, the crowd cheers, some with hope, some just to see blood. You can't help but flinch as wood splinters, a rider crashes to the ground, and everyone rushes forward to lift him up. The victor's name is already being sung, his noble act inscribed in the memory of all who watched. But not everyone is cheering. If you glance to the edge of the field, you'll see those who aren't meant to be noticed. The women in the shadows, the servants waiting with pitchers of water, the faces too plain or too poor to warrant a song. Chivalry promises to defend ladies, but only the ones the code finds worthy, usually the rich, the well-born, the beautiful. Everyone else? At best, they're invisible. At worst, they're the convenient casualties of someone else's honour. You listen to the stories the knights tell by the fire. Most are tales of valour, of quests undertaken for a lady's favour, of monsters slain and dragons defeated. But between the lines, you catch something else. A certain pride in conquest, not always of beasts, and certainly not always with consent. The line between wooing and taking, between honour and harassment, blurs into legend. Who gets to decide if a woman's no is a challenge or an insult? Historians still argue whether chivalry actually improved women's safety, or just wrapped danger in velvet and called it romance. You notice the rules of the tournament itself. A knight may not insult another's honour without consequence. Duels can be fought over a sneer or a rumour. But if a servant is humiliated, if a kitchen girl is cornered behind the stables, no one calls for a trial. The code is clear. It's the honour of the knight, not the pain of the powerless, that matters most. The very language of chivalry is tangled with contradiction. Courtly love becomes the ideal, a love so pure, so spiritual, it must never be consummated. Yet the same songs are full of men who pine, who plead, who sometimes force the story to a happier ending by sheer persistence. If the lady relents, it's proof of his devotion. If she doesn't, she becomes the villain of the story, or simply vanishes from it. The troubadours sing her name, but only if she plays her part. Once, in the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine, a poet wrote of a lady locked in a tower of virtue, her knights scaling the walls to win her heart. He didn't write what happened if she said no, or if the courtly game went too far. The rules of chivalry, for all their poetry, left room for only one kind of hero. You slip away from the noise and find yourself in a quiet chapel, where a squire kneels, praying before the relics of some long-dead saint. He prays for courage, for strength, for honour. You wonder what else he prays for. Maybe forgiveness, maybe the strength to forget what he's seen. In the soft candlelight, the code feels heavy and complicated, not just a list of rules, but a burden passed from one generation to the next. Out in the lists, you see a woman's handkerchief fluttering from a lance, the prize for the winner. It's supposed to be a symbol of her choice, her favour. But you know, after spending even a few hours in this world, that such favours are often demanded, not given. A lady might be expected to smile to accept a knight's song or his protection, even if she wants neither. To refuse is dangerous. To her family, to her place in the world. Reputation, again, is everything. One wrong look, one poorly chosen word, and the gossip will eat her alive. Knights boast of their conquests at night, in whispers thick with wine. A few names come up again and again, and not always in the way the songs suggest. Sometimes you hear a tremor in a woman's voice, a friend's quick defence, an awkward silence. Stories are exchanged like currency, each one a brushstroke on the canvas of honour, but only if it makes the right people look good. There are stories too of women who tried to wield the rules of chivalry to their own advantage. Some succeeded, turning courtly games into sources of power, manoeuvring suitors, gaining influence. But for every woman who played the system, a dozen more were trapped by it, hemmed in by the very code that promised to protect them. If a lady is harassed by a knight, she risks everything if she speaks up. If she is believed, the knight loses honour. If not, she loses everything. Occasionally, a case breaks through the silence. In the chronicles of a 14th century Burgundian court, there is a record of a lady who publicly accused a knight of unwelcome advances. The court, in its wisdom, judged her unwomanly, and the knight merely too passionate. Both left the court in disgrace, but the lady's family never recovered. The tale becomes a caution, a warning to others, let sleeping dogs lie. Back on the tournament field, you watch a young knight fail in his first tilt. The crowd jeers and his father's face darkens. Later, you see the same knight taking out his humiliation on a hapless stable boy. The code of honour, you realise, does nothing to protect the powerless from the moods of the powerful. If anyone objects, they're told, it's none of your business, keep your place. A troubadour strums a lute and sings a love song to the gathering dusk. His melody is lovely, his lyrics pure. But you notice the kitchen maids rolling their eyes, whispering behind their hands. They know the truth. Courtly love is a game for the privileged, a mask for real desires and the dangers that come with them. In their world, a nobleman's advances are not poetic, they're perilous. The line between seduction and coercion is as thin as the silk on a lady's sleeve. Yet there is a kind of rebellion in these corners. Some women, armed with wit and alliances, learn to push back. An eyebrow raised at the right moment, a rumour planted, a favour exchanged in secret, small acts that bend the rules just enough to give them room to breathe. You realise that survival in this world depends as much on cunning as on courage. Historians still argue whether chivalry was ever meant to protect anyone but the privileged few. Some point to the poems and the sermons, the grand gestures and the vows, as proof of a better age. Others count the stories of those left out, left hurt, left behind, and wonder if the code was always just a costume, worn for the benefit of the crowd, but quickly discarded when the doors closed. There's an odd comfort in the rituals of the tournament. Everyone knows their part. The knights ride, the ladies cheer, the commoners gossip, and the losers retreat with dignity, or as much dignity as they can muster. But beneath that surface, the consequences of honour are real and lasting. A whispered accusation can ruin a reputation. A secret rendezvous discovered can mean banishment or worse. The fear of being labelled dishonourable is so powerful that it keeps most people in line, even when it means swallowing their pain. You walk among the tents at night, the air thick with smoke and secrets. Somewhere, a woman is weeping quietly, her story swallowed by the darkness. Somewhere else, a group of squires is plotting a prank, a way to humiliate a rival under the cover of night. For every act of public bravery there is a private injury, and most will never make it into the chronicles. You see too how chivalry bleeds into every aspect of life, not just the tournament, but the courtroom, the church, the marriage bed. Honour justifies 1,000 little injustices, and duty smooths them over with ritual and prayer. Even when a wrong is acknowledged, it is wrapped in words meant to restore harmony, not to heal the wounded. If you listen hard enough, you can hear the cracks in the foundation. The code is brittle, not because people don't believe in it, but because it demands the impossible, perfection in an imperfect world. Those who fail, those who fall, are quietly shuffled aside. Their stories become warnings, their pain becomes invisible, their lessons are quietly unlearned. Still, the dream of chivalry lingers. Even now, the sight of a knight kneeling before a lady can make your heart flutter, until you remember how much was hidden, how much was lost, in the name of keeping up appearances. As you settle back, you might find yourself wishing for a simpler time, a world where good and evil are clear, where right always triumphs. But the closer you look, the more you realize. The past is always messier than it appears. The stories we tell about honor are never quite the same as the truth. Before you drift off, let your mind linger on the field at sunset, the banners folding in the twilight, the echoes of laughter and longing mingling in the dusk. You remember the woman at the edge of the crowd, the one who watched but never cheered. Her story, like so many, is still waiting to be told. The first light of morning in the medieval world doesn't feel like a new beginning. It's just another spin of the wheel, another day to protect your place in the household hierarchy. You rise early, even before the birds. Outside, the dew is heavy on the fields, but inside the manor hums with its own rituals. In the half-dark, you move quietly, always alert to the footsteps and voices that tell you who holds power and who must pretend not to notice. The medieval home is its own small kingdom, ruled by a single head, usually the man whose name the house bears. His word is law, his mood the weather everyone else lives under. The children sense it. The servants know it by heart. Everyone's role is mapped out in invisible ink generations old. Breakfast is quiet, formal, even if there's nothing to eat but bread from yesterday. No one slouches, not even the youngest child. Everyone knows what happens when the fragile structure of respect is cracked. Sometimes it's just a glare, sometimes something sharper. You find yourself in the kitchen, the heart of the house, where gossip and warnings swirl in equal measure. A serving girl whispers about last night's argument, how the lord lost his temper, how the lady turned her face to the wall. You hear stories, always coded, always incomplete. She's not herself this week, or best not to cross him today. No one says outright what happened. In this house, as in so many, the family honour is more important than any single person's pain. When you walk the halls, you see the tapestry of daily life. A boy standing too straight, hoping not to be noticed. A woman smoothing her hair as if that alone will keep the peace. A servant tending the fire, moving as quietly as a shadow. There is a rhythm to the silence here. A way people avoid certain rooms, certain hours, certain looks. It's not just survival. It's a habit so old that it feels natural. When a plate drops, everyone holds their breath, listening not for the crash but for the silence after. Will there be shouting? Or something quieter, more dangerous? The structure of respect in the household is as rigid as any law. The children must honour their father. The wife must honour her husband. The servants must honour everyone above them. It sounds noble. Respect your elders. Honour your house. But you can see how these words are used to build walls around pain. If someone is mistreated, the first question isn't, "Are you all right?" but, "What will people say if they find out?" The shame of the abuser is transferred to the abused, neat as folding laundry. Historians still argue whether medieval families were colder than modern ones, or simply better at pretending. The record is full of contradictions. Some letters reveal fierce love, desperate worry, a mother's prayers scribbled in the margins. Others are blunt, even chilling. A father writing of his son as property, a husband weighing his wife's worth like a coin. The truth probably lived somewhere between the lines, hidden in the spaces no one bothered to record. You walk past the solar, where the lady of the house sits with her embroidery, her daughters beside her. They sew in silence, glancing up when the door opens. You see the quickness with which the younger daughter looks away, the tightness around the mother's mouth. It's the same everywhere, in cottages and castles alike. If the head of the house is cruel or careless, there's little recourse. Complaint is dangerous. It breaks the image of a perfect home, and that in this world is a worse crime than any bruised arm or wounded spirit. If a woman dares to protest, she's accused of dishonouring her husband. If a child speaks out, they're said to bring shame on the family. Even the servants, often the most vulnerable, are told that loyalty and discretion are their greatest virtues. And if the family's reputation suffers, everyone feels it. Marriage prospects vanish, business dries up, neighbours become strangers overnight. It's not that no one sees what's happening. They see, and then they look away. They tell themselves it's not their business, or that it's just the way of things. They make little jokes, nervous and hollow. A heavy hand makes light work, or she should be grateful for a roof over her head. If you're the one suffering, these jokes sting worse than the blows. They tell you that everyone knows, and no one will help. Occasionally something erupts, a scandal too big to be hidden. Perhaps a wife flees, or a child runs away, or a servant disappears in the night. The village whispers. The local priest may intervene, but more often to urge reconciliation than justice. The family gathers close, presenting a united front. They mourn the loss of reputation more than the loss of the person. In a few weeks, if they're lucky, the story fades, replaced by new gossip. The wheel turns, the pain remains. Still, people find ways to cope. Some build small alliances, a sister who offers a place to hide, a friend who sneaks a treat from the kitchen, a grandmother whose silence is both a shield and a confession. Others withdraw, learning to become invisible, to anticipate every mood and dodge every danger. There's a peculiar strength in this quiet endurance, a kind of heroism that will never make it into the songs. You notice that the rules are different for those at the top. If a lord is cruel, he's strong. If a lady is sharp-tongued, she's clever. The very things that would ruin a servant's life are admired in the powerful, as long as they never lose control in public. The more respected the family, the more eager everyone is to forgive or forget. A scandal is a threat to everyone, not just those involved. Yet the hierarchy is fragile. One bad harvest, one rumour, and everything can change. Families fall quickly in the medieval world, their fortunes dependent on the goodwill of neighbours, the favour of the church, the whim of a distant lord. In these moments, the old rules tighten their grip. Loyalty is demanded, silence is enforced. Even if the pain grows unbearable, the fear of what comes next keeps everyone in line. Historians debate whether the household was truly a safe haven for anyone. Some argue that the privacy of home offered women and children a degree of protection from the outside world. Others counter that privacy only made abuse easier to hide. The rare glimpses into real family life, drawn from court records, stray letters, the occasional confession, paint a picture more complicated and painful than any tale of knights or ladies. There are, of course, exceptions. Some families are loving, kind, even joyful. There are moments of real warmth, a father lifting his child onto his shoulders, a mother singing as she bakes bread, siblings sharing secrets by the fire. But even in these homes, the shadow of honour looms. If trouble comes, reputation comes first. If an outsider asks questions, the family closes ranks. Trust, in the end, is a luxury few can afford. In the cramped quarters of the manor, secrets multiply like mice. Servants know more than they say, and children sense more than adults realise. Every cough, every hurried whisper, every sudden silence is a clue. Some learn to interpret these signs, to guess when to leave a room or when to hide a bruise. Others ignore them, hoping that what they don't see won't hurt them. One winter, you hear the story of a boy who angered his father during a feast. The punishment was swift. a public scolding, a private beating. The next day the boy is quiet, his eyes downcast. The servants whisper, the mother frets. The family prays more often, but no one speaks of what happened. Instead, they invite the neighbours for supper, serving the best bread and wine. "See how happy we are," the lady says, her smile too bright. "The performance is flawless. The pain is buried safe behind the mask of honour. As you wander the halls, you begin to understand how exhausting this life must be. To be constantly alert, always performing, always weighing your words. This is the real cost of living under the rule of honour. It's not just the big scandals that wear people down. It's the endless parade of small humiliations, the daily sacrifices made in the name of keeping up appearances. And yet there's a strange kind of hope in the resilience you see. People carve out moments of kindness, small joys that no one can take away. A stolen apple, a whispered joke, a secret game in the attic. These are the real treasures, hoarded against the long nights and the silent mornings. The architecture of the house itself seems to reflect its secrets. Thick walls, narrow staircases, hidden alcoves, places to hide, to eavesdrop, to escape. Sometimes you think the house is alive, watching, keeping track of every slight, every kindness, every secret never spoken aloud. The hierarchy of the household isn't just about power, it's about survival. Everyone is looking for a place to belong, a place to feel safe, even if that safety is just an illusion. You see it in the way people cluster together, in the rituals they invent to ward off bad luck, in the songs sung softly after dark. As the day fades, you stand in the doorway and watch the shadows lengthen across the floor. The family gathers for evening prayers, their voices rising together, each one trying to believe that tomorrow will be better. Maybe it will, or maybe it will just be another day of survival, another performance, another secret kept in the name of honour. But for now, let yourself imagine that quiet moment by the fire. A hand gently touching yours, a promise whispered too softly to be heard. In the end, it's these small acts of courage and compassion that make the difference, even in a world where honour too often hides the truth. You wake the next morning to the peal of church bells, a sound as old and inescapable as the dawn itself. Faith threads through every hour of medieval life, as necessary and unquestioned as bread. By sunrise, the manor's servants have already whispered their prayers. By noon, the village green fills with women balancing baskets and men grumbling about taxes, each crossing themselves as they pass the tiny stone chapel at the crossroads. The world is built on ritual, and at its heart sits religion, sometimes a comfort, sometimes a cage, but always there. You step into the church cool and shadowed, the air thick with incense. The villagers kneel on the rushes, eyes closed, lips moving in silent bargains with God. Here, the priest's voice carries over the congregation. Keep your souls pure. Protect your family's honour. Bear your crosses with humility. There it is again, that word, honour, braided together with virtue, wound tight around every rule and every expectation. But beneath the ringing of the bells you sense the other side, the way faith's obsession with purity and reputation becomes a loophole for cruelty, a shadow no confession can quite lift. In this world, religion is not just about private belief or inner peace, it's a public badge. Your piety is measured, weighed, and gossiped about in the marketplace, and sometimes, the more loudly someone shouts about virtue, the more desperate they are to hide something ugly beneath. You watch a woman in the third pew, her head bowed so low you almost can't see her face. Last week the village was alive with whispers. Her son had been caught stealing, her husband had come home angry, and now she's here every morning praying for forgiveness. Not just for her family's sins, but for the stain on their name. The priest never mentions the gossip directly, but his sermon brims with warnings about keeping temptation from your door. No one misses the point. You notice the way everyone's eyes flicker when she stands. Some nod in sympathy, others avoid her gaze. It's a small thing, but it means everything. The church is meant to be a refuge, but here reputation matters almost as much as faith. You realise that in the Middle Ages, spirituality is less a shield and more a balancing act. Everyone terrified of slipping from grace and taking their family down with them. Confession, that great medieval ritual, is supposed to be a path to forgiveness. You kneel, whisper your failures, and walk away lighter, or so they say. But in a small village, secrets don't stay secret for long. The priest knows whose voice trembles with real guilt, and whose confessions are carefully sanitized. Sometimes forgiveness is doled out unevenly. A wealthy landowner gets a gentle penance, a servant girl gets a lecture, and someone always leaves the confessional a little more afraid than before. Historians still argue whether medieval religion was genuinely compassionate, or merely another tool for social control. Some point to the generous alms, the monasteries that sheltered the poor, the saints whose miracles gave hope to the desperate. Others count the endless rules, the punishments for impurity, the confessions used as leverage, and wonder if fear ever truly left anyone's heart. You listen to a sermon on purity. The priest's words are soft but sharp. He warns the women against pride, against vanity, against being too friendly with any man who isn't their husband. The men are urged to be strong, to protect their families, but also to keep them in line. A good wife is obedient, the priest intones. A good child is silent. You see the faces in the pews, the girl who fidgets, the mother who stares at her hands, the boy who sits too straight. Everyone knows their part in this performance. Sometimes the rules are enforced with kindness. A neighbour brings bread. A priest prays for a family's troubles. Other times, the pressure is suffocating. If a woman is rumoured to have fallen, she might be shunned, her children mocked, her husband's business ruined. If a child speaks out of turn, they are told to confess and repent. If a man fails to control his temper, it's seen as a test of his wife's patience, not his own fault. There's a story in the chronicles of a small English village. A girl, barely 16, is accused of tempting the miller with her laughter. She's made to stand before the congregation, dressed in a plain shift, her hair loose, her head bowed. The priest lectures her about modesty, about the dangers of pride. The real lesson is clear. Her shame is a warning to others. The miller, meanwhile, sits in the back pew untroubled. The village will remember her disgrace, not his. You notice how often the church itself becomes the backdrop for stories of hidden harm. Sanctuary is a holy rite. Anyone pursued for a crime can claim it by touching the altar. But what happens when the person seeking sanctuary is not the criminal, but the victim? Sometimes the answer is silence. The priest listens, promises to pray, but his hands are tied by custom and law. The victim is urged to forgive, to endure, to offer up their suffering for the sake of their soul. The real crime goes unpunished, hidden in the folds of ritual and prayer. If you walk behind the church, you might find the small, overgrown cemetery where broken stories are buried. The gravestones are worn, the names fading. Some were mothers who died in childbirth, others children lost to fever. Here, the failures of honour and compassion are tucked away, hidden from the living. The village remembers the dead with pious stories. She was a saint, she never complained. But you wonder what really happened behind those closed doors. There's a certain humour in the contradictions of faith. People cross themselves before gossiping, pray for humility, and then compare their neighbour's piety. You overhear two old women arguing about who brings the freshest flowers for the Virgin Mary. It's not about pride, it's about setting an example, one huffs, arranging her bouquet so everyone can see. The saints, you suspect, would be amused. The church calendar marks every season. Lent for penance, Easter for hope, Advent for waiting. Each ritual brings the community together, but also reminds everyone of their place. Some stand at the front, others at the back, and everyone is always being watched. There is comfort in belonging, but also a constant anxiety. Am I good enough? Am I pure enough? Will my mistakes haunt my family? The cycle of confession, repentance, and forgiveness turns like a wheel, never stopping. Historians still puzzle over how ordinary people felt about their faith. Did they really believe that suffering now meant reward in heaven? Or did they just hope for a little peace, a little kindness in this life? The records are full of prayers for rain, for health, for safe childbirth. Please not just for souls, but for bodies, for families, for daily bread. You sense that faith in the Middle Ages was both a lifeline and a leash, binding people to each other, but also holding them in place. The Church's obsession with purity leaves little room for questioning. To doubt the priest is to risk excommunication, to risk being cut off from everything: food, shelter, community. If someone suggests that a punishment is unfair, they're accused of pride, of challenging the will of God. Endure your trials, the priest says, and your reward will be great. You can't help but wonder what kind of reward could make up for all this fear. Yet, even within these walls, people find ways to resist. A wife might leave a loaf of bread at a neighbour's door. A child might whisper a forbidden joke during Mass. A young man might refuse to name names in the confessional. These small acts are rebellions, sparks of humanity, in a world determined to press everyone into the same shape. There's a tale about a wandering friar who comes to town preaching against hypocrisy. He warns that those who hide cruelty behind piety are the worst sinners of all. The village listens politely, but by sundown he's been sent on his way. Too much truth isn't good for the soul, the priest murmurs, smoothing his robes. You notice, as the afternoon sun slants through the stained glass, how tired everyone looks. Faith is supposed to bring peace, but often it just brings more rules, more pressure. The weight of honour and reputation is heaviest here, where people come for comfort and instead find judgment. Still, the church is the heart of the community. Weddings, christenings, funerals, every milestone passes beneath its arches. Even the harshest rules are softened by ritual, by the music of the choir, by the smell of bread and wax. People cling to faith not just out of fear, but out of hope. Hope that tomorrow might be gentler, that suffering will mean something, that someone somewhere sees their pain. As the day fades, you join the villagers in the nave, the pews creaking as everyone kneels for evening prayers. The priest's voice rises and falls like the wind, soothing, relentless. You close your eyes and let the sound wash over you, the ancient words promising comfort, even if they never quite deliver. In this twilight, you feel the ache of all those who have ever carried shame and hurt in silence, all those who have hidden behind the mask of honour, all those who have longed for mercy more than justice. For now, let the candlelight blur the lines between hope and fear. The church bells ring again, and you leave the sanctuary behind, your footsteps soft on the stone, your heart heavy with the stories no one ever tells. In the quiet, you wonder if faith will ever be enough. You find yourself wandering out of the chapel's heavy shadow, the last of the incense still clinging to your hair as the midday sun warms the village green. Here, the world narrows and magnifies, every glance and gesture broadcast for all to see, and, more dangerously, all to interpret. In the medieval village, honour is not just a private matter. It's the only currency that can save or destroy you, and everyone is an accountant, keeping the books. You trail your hand along a low stone wall where children crouch, weaving garlands from wild flowers, their chatter a mixture of song and secrets. Over by the well, women gather with their buckets, their voices low, eyes darting between the folds of their linen hoods. The market stalls brim with apples and turnips, but it's the stories traded here that have the sharpest bite. You notice how quickly the mood can shift. A laugh cut short as a certain man passes, a woman's gaze dropping as another approaches. The small silences that swell and burst around names spoken a little too loudly. If you listen closely, you'll hear stories slip from mouth to mouth, not always true, but always shaping someone's fate. Gossip in the village is like the wind, invisible, insistent, impossible to outrun. Last week a farmhand stumbled home drunk, singing loud enough to wake the crows. By dawn the story had swelled. Now he'd been seen climbing through the miller's window or fighting with the reeve or chasing after the baker's daughter. By noon, his mother had been to the priest twice, and the baker's wife stood arms crossed in the market, daring anyone to meet her eye. The real events are lost, but the damage is real. The farmhand's family walks with their heads lower, neighbours become more distant, and next year's work grows less certain. Here, secrets don't stay secret for long. The very architecture of the village, tiny cottages huddled close, doors always half open, windows little more than slits, invites eavesdropping and fuels curiosity. You hear whispers drift on the evening breeze. She's spending too much time at the river, or he never used to come home that late. Sometimes nothing comes of it. Sometimes a single rumour is enough to set a family on the road to ruin. You watch the faces of the women by the well, their voices warm but wary. The eldest, Maud, runs a finger around the rim of her bucket, her tone casual, but her words sharp as a scythe. "Did you hear what happened at the blacksmith's last night?" Around her the others lean in, eager and uneasy. To be noticed by Maud is both a blessing and a curse. She's the keeper of stories, and if she speaks your name, you'd better hope it's with kindness. Gossip, you realise, is a tool. It can protect as well as destroy. A neighbour might whisper that a woman is blessed with good fortune to explain her new cloak, sparing her suspicion. Or a young man's rough edges might be sanded down by a rumour that his father was gentle. But more often, gossip guards the village's boundaries, keeping everyone in line, reminding them what happens to those who step too far out of place. Historians still argue whether gossip was a safety valve or a poison. Some claim it built solidarity, enforcing a rough kind of justice when official laws were distant or indifferent. Others see only the harm it wrought, the reputations ruined, the lives hemmed in by suspicion and fear. The truth is probably both. A village needs stories as much as it needs bread, but stories can turn sharp in a heartbeat. You wander toward the edge of the village where the cottages give way to gardens and fields. Here, life is a constant negotiation with nature, with neighbours, and with yourself. If a woman is wronged, say, a harsh word from her husband, a slap that leaves more than a bruise, what can she do? Sometimes she tells a friend in confidence, trusting the secret will stay. But the next morning, she sees her friend's eyes shift, hears her own story twisted, retold. Shame settles like frost. To speak out is to risk everything, not just her own place, but her children's, her sister's, her father's. Silence is survival, but it's a lonely kind. There's a story every village knows, repeated in whispers but never written down. A young woman, bright and quick, finds herself cornered by a wealthy farmer. She resists, but the tale is already written for her. If she tells, will she be believed? More likely, her motives will be questioned, her virtue doubted, her family's standing ruined. It's easier, everyone says, to keep quiet. So the harm lingers, invisible but real, and the village moves on, grateful not to have been drawn in. Sometimes, though, silence breaks. In a tiny hamlet a few miles away, a scandal erupted when a married woman accused a local reeve of mistreatment. For days the village divided into camps, her supporters certain she'd suffered, others whispering that she'd brought it on herself. The priest called for reconciliation. The lord, anxious about the unrest, paid the woman's family a small sum to leave. By week's end the village returned to normal, but the woman's name was never spoken with respect again. The reeve kept his job, his honour technically unscathed. You noticed that the most powerful tool for keeping secrets is not force, but isolation. If someone tries to tell their story, they're gently, then firmly pushed aside. Why stir trouble? He's a good man, really. It's not our place to judge. The lines are so familiar you could almost finish them yourself. When the pain is greatest, the silence is thickest. Even children learn the rules early. You see them at play, acting out the lives of their elders. One child is the lord, another the maid, a third the busybody neighbour. When the lord shouts, the maid bows her head, the neighbour whispers behind her hand, It's meant to be a game, but you sense the lesson sinking in. Speak too loudly, step out of line, and you'll be alone. Yet even in this web of whispers, kindness finds a way. Some neighbours look out for each other, bending the rules in secret. A loaf of bread left on a windowsill, a wordless embrace by the riverbank, a promise never to repeat what was overheard. These small acts of mercy keep hope alive. Sometimes a story is gently altered, softened so that its subject can walk to church with head held high. Still, the wounds of gossip linger. A boy grows into a man forever shadowed by something his father did or didn't do. A girl, accused once of being too bold, finds doors quietly closed to her. Entire families move away, driven not by famine or plague, but by the slow poison of reputation. The past is never past in a village. It's retold with every harvest, every wedding, every funeral. Historians sift through court records and parish rolls, searching for the truth behind the stories. Occasionally they find a case where someone fought back, a slander suit brought by a woman against her neighbour, a family defending its honour before the manor court. But even then the outcome is rarely clear-cut. Winning the case doesn't always restore a good name. Sometimes the mere fact of fighting is seen as a new shame. You return to the market where the stalls are emptying, the sun sliding behind the trees. A group of old men argue over ale about whose turn it is to tend the village bull. Their laughter is sharp, their memories long. When a stranger passes through, they recall every slight, every scandal, every tale of a traveller who never returned. Outsiders are always suspect. Better to stick with your own, even if your own hurt you. You see the paradox at the heart of village life. Everyone is under scrutiny, but everyone is also on their own. The community can close ranks in an instant, locking someone out as quickly as they once welcomed them in. Redemption is rare. A scandal from a generation ago might still echo, keeping someone from marrying well or finding work. Yet there's a strange resilience here. Life continues. Children are born, lovers steal kisses in the orchard, old rivalries mellow into jokes shared by the fire. The village remembers, but it also forgets, or at least pretends to. Some wounds fade with time, others harden into legend. You pause at the edge of the green, watching as the last stragglers make their way home. In the hush of dusk you sense the stories settling for the night, curling up in the corners of cottages and under the stones of the well. Tomorrow the wheel will turn again, and the village will wake with new secrets to share and old ones to guard. But for now, let yourself drift in the gentle murmur of the village, its laughter, its lies, its quiet acts of courage and cruelty. The stories never end, and neither does the need to belong. You find yourself wandering away from the village green as the sun slips toward the horizon, the hush of dusk setting in. The air grows soft, tinged with wood smoke and the distant singing of someone heading home from the fields. You walk past hedgerows, the grass cool beneath your feet, until the land opens into a meadow behind a grand house. A place where the rules of romance, courtly love, and reputation twist into strange new shapes. It's here, away from the gossip of the village but still under 1,000 watchful eyes, that another story unfolds, one painted in poetry and longing, but shadowed by risk and silence. At first, the ideals of courtly love seem beautiful, almost magical. You hear the songs drifting from the manor's solar, verses about noble knights adoring distant ladies, about longing so pure it's supposed to lift both lovers toward the divine. Troubadours with nimble fingers pluck their lutes, weaving tales of love that survives all obstacles. You can almost believe that in this world desire is gentle, longing is sacred, and women are placed on pedestals so high that no harm can ever reach them. But as you sit at the edge of a rose garden, hidden behind a trellis heavy with blossoms, you start to notice the cracks in the fantasy. The lady of the house, her gown rich with embroidery, glances over her shoulder again and again, not just in anticipation but in anxiety. Her knight, handsome in his surcoat, lingers too long near the fountain, his smile both charming and insistent. Servants exchange glances, the kind that say they've seen this all before. The rules of courtly love, you soon realise, are a double-edged sword. Yes, the lady is supposed to inspire her knight to acts of valour. Yes, she is worshipped in poetry, praised for her beauty and wit. But in the real world, her power is limited. If she reciprocates, she risks everything: her reputation, her marriage, even her life. If she refuses, she's a cold-hearted villain, or worse, a challenge to be conquered. The knight's devotion is only chivalrous as long as she plays her role. If she tries to write her own script, the audience turns on her in an instant. A night falls, and the court gathers for a feast. You sit in a corner, half hidden behind a curtain, watching the interplay of glances and laughter, the games played beneath the surface. A bard recites a story about a lady who rejected a persistent suitor, how he pined for years, then won her by never giving up. The court laughs, claps, drinks to his perseverance. No one asks what the lady wanted. The lesson is clear. The persistence of the pursuer is heroic. The resistance of the pursued is something to be overcome. You see the servants standing against the wall, eyes lowered, faces carefully blank. They know how these stories usually end. Sometimes the pursuit is harmless, just a verse and a flower left on a windowsill. Other times, it's not. If the lady is high-born, she might be able to keep the knight at bay with sharp words and clever excuses. If she's not, if she's a companion, a lady-in-waiting or a servant, the game can turn dangerous quickly. Power is everything, and the code of courtly love, for all its beauty, rarely protects those without it. Historians still argue whether courtly love empowered women or trapped them. Some point to the poetry and letters, the wit and cleverness women wielded to survive in the world of chivalry. Others look at the silences, the vanished names, the sudden marriages, the girls who simply disappeared from the records, and wonder if romance was just another story used to excuse what should never have been allowed. You watch a young knight press a favour into a lady's hand, a silk ribbon delicate and precious. The gesture is public and everyone laughs, but you see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers tremble. To refuse is an insult, to accept is a promise. Later, as the laughter dies and the candles burn low, she slips out into the garden, her face pale and drawn. You follow quietly, your footsteps muffled by the damp grass. You hear her voice, barely more than a whisper. "I never asked for this." But the knight takes her words, and no one else hears. The code of romance in this world is full of contradictions. Knights are supposed to protect the honour of all women, but in practice, all means the right sort. Those who are poor or plain or without family slip through the cracks. For them, attention is a danger, not a compliment. The knight who boasts of conquering a noble heart is a hero. The one who pursues a servant is dismissed as having needs. Either way, the stories always blame the woman if things go wrong. Even among the highborn, rumours stick like burrs. You hear about the countess whose admirer was caught climbing her balcony, the maid who left in the night, the daughter whose sudden marriage solved a scandal before it could be spoken aloud. The code is supposed to elevate love above base desire, but it does so by policing every smile, every word, every sidelong glance. If you listen to the kitchen talk, you'll hear the jokes and warnings. "Never meet a knight's eyes unless you want trouble," one cook mutters, rolling out dough. "If he gives you a rose, give it to the pigs." The laughter is nervous. Everyone knows someone who's been caught out by a rumour or a romance gone sour. The stories swirl through the halls, sharpening whenever a door is closed or a voice is raised just out of sight. Occasionally a story slips through the cracks and into the court records. In one dusty chronicle, a case is described. A lady accuses a knight of overstepping his bounds. The court debates, the poems are weighed against her testimony, and in the end the judgment is vague. He is told to mind his affections. She is sent home to recover her modesty. The incident is quickly forgotten by all but her. There is a certain humour in the way the rules bend. If a romance succeeds, everyone claims they saw it coming. If it fails, no one admits to having known a thing. The musicians at feasts improvise ballads about impossible love, but the servants clean up the mess left behind. The gap between ideal and reality is wide enough to swallow a life whole. You notice that the rituals of courtly love bleed into every interaction. Letters must be written with careful phrasing. Too plain, and you're accused of being cold. Too flowery, and you're mocked for trying too hard. Gifts must be chosen wisely. Roses are romantic, but too many and someone will say you're desperate. A single glance can mean everything or nothing at all, depending on who's watching. It's a performance, every day, with the highest stakes imaginable. The real heartache comes from the way suffering is wrapped in poetry and presented as something noble. She pines away for love, the song goes, but no one asks whether she ever wanted to. He wears her favour into battle, but never mentions her fear. The world claps for the knight's courage, but it is the lady who pays the price if anything goes wrong. Historians still debate whether these stories are fiction or fact, ideal or warning. The surviving records are mostly written by men, for men about men's dreams. The women's voices are there, but only faintly, hidden in a letter left unsigned, a gift returned, a rumour that never quite dies. Yet even here, you see flashes of rebellion. A lady refuses to play the game, choosing her own husband or sending a suitor packing with a sharp word. Sometimes, a knight turns away from a conquest, his pride wounded but his conscience intact. There are friendships too, real and deep, that grow in the shadow of all this spectacle. But for every story of agency, there are many more of resignation. At night the garden is silent. The petals of the roses close tight. You sit by a stone bench, listening to the wind. Somewhere, a door creaks, and footsteps hurry past. The stories of romance, like the secrets of the village, drift on the breeze. Beautiful, dangerous, impossible to hold. Before you drift off, let yourself remember the words of a song. Love is patient, love is kind. In this world, patience and kindness are often the first things lost. But somewhere, maybe in a hidden note or a whispered promise, a truer story waits. One where love is not a risk, but a refuge. The air in the village cools as evening approaches, the sky streaked with gold and the last of the day's voices fading into the low, careful murmur of supper behind closed doors. You find yourself drawn to the edge of the green, where the manor house rises with a quiet authority, its stone face expressionless, its windows flickering with candlelight. In the hush, you sense another kind of power at work, less visible than the daily parade of gossip and alliances, but far more dangerous, the law and its odd shifting sense of justice. It's said that the law is blind, but in the medieval world, justice wears a patch over one eye and squints suspiciously through the other. The rules are written in Latin, posted on parchments that only a handful can read, interpreted by men whose concern for order often trumps any interest in truth. The grand ideal of law, protection for the weak, punishment for the guilty, sounds good on feast days and from the pulpit. But here, under the hush of twilight, you see how easily those words bend. If you wander into the village square, you'll find the stocks, the whipping post, and the little wooden bench where the manor court gathers on market days. It's here that disputes are settled, oaths sworn, and punishments meted out in full view of neighbours and strangers alike. A petty thief is shamed, a boundary dispute is decided, a quarrel over a chicken is ended with a handshake and a fine. The process feels fair, almost neighbourly, until you look closer. The cases that make it to the bench are those the community is willing to see, the ones that matter most, the wounds inflicted inside homes, behind barn doors, in the dark corners of power, are almost never spoken aloud. To accuse someone openly is to risk everything, your own reputation, your family's place, the fragile peace of the village. If the accused is powerful or well-liked, or simply good at hiding, the law's blind eye becomes very convenient indeed. You notice how the language of the court itself is designed to protect not the vulnerable, but the peace. Disturbing the king's quiet, bringing shame to the village, breach of the peace, these are the crimes most harshly punished. It is not the act itself, but the threat to harmony that draws the law's attention. a wife who dares to speak of her husband's cruelty, a servant who whispers about a master's advances, finds herself accused of causing discord, of undermining the social order. Suddenly her suffering is a threat, her truth an inconvenience. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was truly unjust or just a product of its time. Some point to the careful records, the elaborate oaths, the rituals designed to root out lies and reward the honest. Others point to the silences, the missing names, the erased accusations, the 100 ways the system could be turned against the very people it was meant to protect. You attend a manor court sitting on a rough wooden bench beside the reeve and the bailiff, your knees pressed together, your ears straining to catch every word. Today, a woman stands before the Lord, her face pale but determined. She accuses her neighbour of taking her hens, of calling her a whore, of spreading stories about her daughter. The court listens, the men nod, but when she mentions her husband's temper, the bruises, the fear, an awkward silence falls. The Lord coughs, the reeve shifts in his seat. "Let's settle the chicken business first," the Lord says, his voice brisk. The rest, everyone agrees, is best left at home. You realise that law here is not about justice but about maintaining peace. A crime that disrupts the village, an arson, a murder, a brawl, must be dealt with. But the slow violence of daily life, the insults and threats, the harm that leaves no mark but lingers for years, is tidied away. The victim is told to be patient, pray for peace, keep the family name clean. The real wrong, everyone agrees, is to let strangers see the village's dirty laundry. It's not just the courts that fail. Even the church, with its sermons on mercy and confession, often urges silence for the sake of harmony. A woman who confesses her husband's abuse is told to bear her cross and endure as Christ did. A child who speaks of a priest's harsh hand is reminded to respect his elders. The system is built to protect itself. You hear stories whispered by the fire, tales of those who try to challenge the system and pay dearly. A young maid accuses her master of improper conduct. She is dismissed without reference, sent to a distant village, her reputation in tatters. The master's wife arranges a generous dowry for a quick marriage. The master himself confesses to a moment's indiscretion, receives a penance, and nothing more. The lesson is clear. The cost of seeking justice is often higher than the cost of keeping silent. The law itself is riddled with loopholes. A man accused of violence can swear an oath, calling on 12 neighbours to vouch for his good character. If enough are willing, out of fear, loyalty, or simple habit, the case is closed, the record clear. A woman who cannot find witnesses, who stands alone, is advised to let it be. Evidence is rarely physical. Wounds heal, words are forgotten, shame is invisible. The rules favour those who know how to play the game. You notice too that the law is obsessed with reputation. Good name is everything. A stain on it is worse than poverty. If a woman accuses a man, she risks being branded a liar or worse. If a man is shamed, he may take revenge not on his accuser, but on his own family. The cycle continues, endless and exhausting. Sometimes the law is downright theatrical. A pig is put on trial for eating a child's bread. The villagers gather, the judge solemn, the animals squealing in confusion. The spectacle distracts, amuses, reassures. See, justice is done. But when a girl disappears or a servant flees in the night, the law is less eager to perform. Historians still pore over the records looking for evidence of justice. They find odd glimpses. A widow who wins her case, a servant who is compensated for injury, a lord who is punished for theft. But these are exceptions, celebrated precisely because they are so rare. The rule is silence, discretion, the endless balancing of order over truth. You watch as the woman in the court leaves, her head high but her eyes dull. The lord congratulates himself on his fairness, the villagers nod. Life goes on, the wheel turns. The woman's hens are returned, her husband's anger is not. Her daughter avoids the market for weeks, her friends stand at a distance. The price of peace is paid, in silence and in sorrow. Yet even here there are glimmers of hope. Some lords, some priests, some neighbours try to do right. They listen, they intervene, they protect the vulnerable as best they can. The system is imperfect, but not unbreakable. Sometimes justice is found not in the court, but in quiet acts of kindness. A neighbour who offers shelter, a priest who finds a new place for a troubled servant, a group of women who gather to care for one of their own. These are the stories that rarely make it into the records, but they matter all the same. As the stars come out, you walk away from the manor past the stocks and the silent court. The village sleeps, each house hiding its own struggles and secrets. You feel the weight of all those unheard stories, the harm done and forgiven, the wounds hidden and endured. The law is still there, silent and unmoved, waiting for the next case, the next day, the next generation. Before you close your eyes, let yourself imagine a world where justice is gentle, where truth is not a threat, and where silence is not the only way to survive. Maybe, just maybe, tomorrow will bring a little more light. The village and manor may settle down at dusk, but the world of medieval trades and guilds rarely sleeps. If you follow the winding path into town, a little larger, a little rowdier than your sleepy hamlet, you'll hear the clang of hammers on anvils and the snap of cards at the tavern. Smoke rises from the baker's oven, the air thick with flour and secrets. Here, honour wears a different face, not the stiff mask of family or faith, but the brash swagger of the brotherhood. If you listen, you'll hear the heart of the Middle Ages beating beneath the cobbles and flagstones, a drum made of camaraderie and competition, and, always, the subtle shuffle of those who must tiptoe around it. Guilds are the lifeblood of any medieval town. Carpenters, tanners, smiths, weavers, all have their halls, their banners, their rules. To belong is to be someone, to have brothers and a place at the table, a say in the market. Every guild jealously guards its secrets, its skills, its good name. An apprentice enters as little more than a servant. A master rises as high as the mayor if fortune smiles. And at every step, honour among brothers is the code that binds. You duck into the smoky gloom of a tavern after sunset, where a group of tailors hold court at a corner table, their cups brimming, their laughter sharp. Stories fly, some true, many improved with each telling. Apprentices are ribbed, new faces are tested, and the unspoken rules are everywhere. Here, loyalty is prized above honesty. To dishonour your trade or your fellows is to lose everything. Step out of line, and the guild closes ranks, turning inward like a snail at the first sign of salt. This camaraderie can be warm, even beautiful. There's real joy in the way the men sing together, in the help a sick craftsman receives, in the pride taken when a fine piece of work hangs above the door. But there's a darker side too, the way rough jokes turn sharp, how newcomers are taught lessons, how the strong look out for each other, sometimes at the expense of the weak. If you're young, quiet, or just unlucky, you learn to laugh when you want to cry. Historians still argue whether the guild system was a force for good or simply a barrier to outsiders. Some see it as a source of stability, a kind of medieval welfare state, a way to keep poverty at bay. Others count the number of broken apprentices, the women who never made it past the laundry, the journeymen who left town under a cloud and never returned. You watch a new apprentice, barely 13, endure his first week. The masters test him, late hours, impossible errands, tricks played with a wink and a shrug. Toughen up, lad, they say. It's how you learn. Sometimes the games turn cruel. A missing tool brings a slap. A clumsy stitch earns a sharp word or worse. If he complains, he's told to be grateful. You're part of the family now, and families don't air their dirty linen. The Guildhall itself is a world within a world, thick with oaths and secrets. The masters decide who gets work, who eats, who rises. If there's trouble, a scandal, a theft, a rumour of mistreatment, it's handled inside, away from the eyes of outsiders. Reputation is everything. If someone steps out of line, the punishment is swift and silent. A black mark on the ledger, a word spread in the right ears, a lost chance for work, for the vulnerable, especially the very young, the newcomers, and the handful of women who try to break into these male spaces. Justice is a rumour, not a promise. In the dark corners of the town, you see how easily honour twists into cruelty. In one alley, a group of older boys corners an apprentice, jostling and jeering. It's just a game, someone says, but the fear in the boy's eyes is real. At the far end of the market, a weaver's widow pleads for fair wages. She's told to mind her tongue. This is a man's world, and you're lucky we let you trade at all. Even the guild's acts of charity come with a warning. Remember who gave you bread, and don't forget where you belong. At the annual feast, the masters toast each other's health. The apprentices serve and scrub. The jokes grow rougher with every cup. If you look closely, you'll see a young man slip out, his eyes shining with anger and shame. No one follows. Tomorrow the work will start again, and the stories will continue as if nothing happened. Yet there are moments of true fellowship. Old friends mending each other's tools, sharing secrets, watching each other's backs on a cold night. You wonder if the good ever outweighs the harm. A blacksmith lifts a crippled boy onto his knee, teaching him to strike true with a tiny hammer. The town's only midwife is quietly respected, her wisdom needed even by those who mock her behind her back. Still, when trouble comes, the first instinct is to protect the group, not the individual. A little humour slips in at every turn. Don't trust a cook with clean hands, the butcher's joke, or a tailor who never pricks his finger. The laughter is infectious, but there's always an edge. Everyone knows who's safe to tease and who isn't. The rules are clear if you know how to read them. You see that for women, the guilds are especially hard ground. Some trades, spinning, baking, brewing, allow women a toe in the door but never a full seat at the table. A widow may inherit her husband's business, but she'll be watched for any mistake. If a girl is apprenticed, she's given the worst jobs. Her wages always a little less, her chances always more fragile. If anything goes wrong, it's her fault. She's not strong enough, too bold, asking for trouble. The rare women who succeed do so by working twice as hard, by cultivating allies, by never ever showing weakness. Sometimes their stories end in triumph. A woman who builds a thriving bakery, who raises her children on her own terms. More often, they end in silence, their names forgotten, their work passed off to the next man in line. The guild's boys' club extends far beyond the workshop. In the tavern, stories are told, alliances formed, rivals taken down with a few whispered words. The outsider, be he from another town or simply too strange, too quiet, too unwilling to play the game, soon finds himself without friends, without work, without hope. It's just business, the masters say, but to those left out it feels like exile. Historians sift through old ledgers and minutes, finding clues to secret alliances, silent exclusions, sudden disappearances. A master's favourite apprentice is named in his will. Another once celebrated is never mentioned again. The records are full of gaps, stories hidden behind the numbers, heartbreak behind the lists of tools and dues. You notice too the guild's rituals of forgiveness. If a master strays, if a member cheats or steals, the guild handles it quietly. A fine paid, a public apology, sometimes a year's exile, then all is forgiven. But if a servant or apprentice errs, the punishment is public and harsh. The double standard is clear, and everyone learns early who the rules are really for. There are moments rare and precious when the code is bent for kindness. An apprentice, orphaned by plague, is quietly given a home. A journeyman who loses everything in a fire is helped back to his feet. A master's widow is spared the worst of the gossip for the sake of her children. These acts don't erase the harm, but they add a thread of hope to the tapestry. At night the town quiets, but the guild hall glows with candlelight. Inside, the masters plot, the journeymen whisper, and somewhere, a lonely apprentice dreams of running away. You realise that honour, in this world, is both a shield and a weapon, a way to belong and a way to keep others out. Before you drift off, let yourself imagine a town where every craftsman's song is welcome, where laughter heals instead of hurts, where honour means lifting up the fallen, not hiding them. The world is not there yet, but in the hush of midnight it feels possible. Dawn creeps over the fields and rooftops, gilding everything with a promise that rarely extends to the people who labour beneath it. You wake with the servants, feet already sore, hands aching from yesterday's work. In the cold grey light the world feels smaller, bounded by the tasks that must be done before the gentry even rise. Here, in the world of work, of kitchen, field, hearth and hall, the rules of honour and silence coil tightest around those who are supposed to be grateful for simply belonging. You move through their manor's back door, careful not to rattle the latch and disturb the sleeping lords above. In the kitchen, the fire has to be coaxed to life. The scullery maid, only 12, blinks the sleep from her eyes as she starts on the heap of greasy pots. The housekeeper, stooped but sharp, barks orders over the clatter. Already you sense the day's burden stacking. Bread to be baked, linen to be scrubbed, the floor to be swept for the 3rd time before breakfast. Outside, women are bent in the field, sleeves rolled, hair wrapped tight. The men sow and reap, but it's the women who weed, glean, gather herbs, feed the hens, tend the goats, and chase the geese from the cabbage. Every moment is spoken for. At home, there's laundry, no soap, only lye and cold water, and children clinging to skirts, and always the shadow of more work. If you finish early, you're told to check the dairy, mend a hem, patch a roof, spin a little more wool. Idle hands, after all, are the devil's workshop. You feel the quiet pride in this work, the bread that turns out golden, the baby soothed with a song, the winter stores neatly stacked. But there's no room for boasting, only for gratitude that you have enough to do. If you complain, even quietly, someone will remind you how much worse it could be. Some girls have nothing but hunger and cold, they say. You're lucky to have a roof. Gratitude becomes another name for silence. The language of duty is everywhere, wrapping itself around women and their labour. To be a good wife, a good daughter, a good servant, is to keep the work going and never make a fuss. Even when exhaustion pins your limbs or a careless word cuts deeper than any knife, you swallow it. That's just life, you're told. Bear it for the sake of the household. Honour means carrying burdens quietly, smiling when thanked and apologising when overlooked. Historians still argue whether women's labour in the Middle Ages was valued or invisible. Some find lists of wages, accounts of skilled spinners and brewers who earned real money, women who ran businesses or inherited farms. Others note that these stories are rare, and that most records treat women as just another part of the household machinery, present but rarely praised, essential but never celebrated. You see, the way's work blurs into exploitation. The maid who is part of the family still eats scraps and sleeps on a mat by the fire. The wife who keeps the books is never allowed to sign her name. If a young woman is forced to stay late in the barn or alone with the steward, everyone knows but no one speaks. It's just her turn, they shrug, or she must have done something to encourage him. Blame, like so much else, rolls downhill. There's a story among the dairymaids about the steward's hand, how it finds its way to every new girl's shoulder, how the quickest way to keep your place is to laugh off his jokes and never be alone with him after dusk. If someone protests, she's told not to bring shame to the house. If she leaves, another will take her place before the week is out. Yet you notice the work never ends. Even on holy days, the beds must be made, the fire kept burning, the children quieted so the masters can pray in peace. Some women use these tasks as a shield, hiding their pain behind chores, asking for more work to avoid a harsh word or a heavy hand. Others find little ways to reclaim their dignity, a ribbon sewn into a hem, a story whispered while kneading dough, a joke shared by the well. These scraps of joy, these small rebellions, are precious as jewels. You walk through the manor garden as the sun climbs higher. The lady of the house inspects the borders, her voice clipped, her gown trailing in the dew. Her daughter trails behind, learning which plants are safe to eat and which will quiet a fever. Even here, with wealth and status, The pressure is relentless. A mistake, a ruined pudding, a dropped tray, a tearful outburst can be spun into a scandal if noticed by the wrong eyes. Dignity, the lady mutters, is what separates us from the peasants. But you see the fear behind her words. In the village, things are little different. A wife who fails to keep her husband happy risks more than harsh words. She can be sent home in disgrace, her dowry returned or lost, her family's name sullied for years. If a servant is dismissed for disobedience or impertinence, she has no recourse. Her word counts for nothing against her masters. Sometimes the cause is real. More often, it's a convenient way to be rid of someone who dared to protest a wrong. You hear stories of girls who return home silent and changed, never speaking of why they left. Their mothers know, their sisters guess, but no one says a word. The village closes around them, protecting its own version of the truth. In this silence, suffering becomes routine, so ordinary that it barely registers as injustice. Still, moments of kindness break through. A tired servant slips a piece of cheese to the beggar at the gate. Two women share a joke over laundry, laughter sparkling for just a moment before fading back into the grey. Sometimes a lord or lady notices the exhaustion in a face and offers an extra portion at supper, a kind word at the end of the day. These gestures don't erase the larger pattern, but they make survival possible. Historians still search the ledgers, looking for traces of the hidden lives of women. A rare lawsuit, a complaint brought before the manor court, a will naming a daughter as heir. These are the cracks where the light shines through. More often, though, the records are silent. The work is done, the pain absorbed, the stories left untold. You wander into the village on market day, watching the women haggle over onions and cheese, their babies balanced on hips, their eyes quick and wary. Behind the bright chatter, you sense a current of worry. Who will help with the harvest? Will there be enough to eat this winter? Will the children stay healthy? The questions hang in the air, unspoken but heavy. You pass the house of a widow, her garden wild and her roof patched with thatch. She works harder than anyone, yet must fight for every scrap of respect. The village pities her, but also resents her strength. She's too proud, they mutter. She should be grateful for what she gets. If she ever protests an injustice, she's accused of forgetting her place. You see too the way mothers teach their daughters to endure. Keep your head down, work hard, don't talk back, they whisper while braiding hair or stirring soup. The advice is survival, passed down like a prayer. If a girl dreams aloud of something better, she's gently hushed. Dreams are for rich ladies, love. Work is for the likes of us. Yet the same endurance that keeps women quiet also helps them survive. A shared glance, a hidden smile, a carefully hoarded coin. These are the weapons of the powerless. Sometimes, a group of women bands together to help a friend in trouble, pooling their meagre resources, watching each other's children, keeping secrets that the men never hear. The lines between kindness and complicity are blurred. A neighbour who looks the other way when a girl is sent away may later help her find work in another town. The village may gossip about a servant's fall from grace, but will still leave a loaf at her door. Everyone is caught in the same web, struggling to do what's right without risking their own place. You pause by the stream, watching a group of girls scrub linen against the stones, their arms red from the cold. They sing to keep their spirits up, weaving nonsense rhymes and cheeky verses about the lords and ladies above. Their laughter is sharp, but you sense the exhaustion underneath. Tomorrow one of them may be gone, sent to a new household, or married off to a stranger. No one will ask why. As the sun sets, you return to the manor. Supper is quiet, the candles guttering in the draught. The servants eat quickly, eyes on their plates. The lady of the house retires early, her footsteps weary on the stairs. In the silence that follows, you hear the weight of all the work done and unthanked, all the pain endured and unspoken. Before you drift off, let yourself imagine a world where every hand is valued, where every burden is shared, where honour means not suffering in silence but lifting each other up. For now, the world is as it is. But in the hush of evening, hope lingers, a small, stubborn light that refuses to be put out. Night comes gently in the medieval world, slipping over rooftops and curling into corners, settling into every house and hovel. Yet in these quiet hours, you can almost taste the ache of secrets kept too long, the tension that presses down on every hearth. Here, inside the walls where families sleep, another truth is at work. Shame is a weapon, and the bravest act is often to simply endure. You sit by the fire with the family, shadows flickering across faces. The day's work is done, but the air is thick with things unsaid. The father's voice is the loudest, but you notice the way the mother's shoulders draw tight, the way the eldest son glances away when the conversation turns sharp. The smallest child, wide-eyed and silent, clings to his mother's sleeve. This is a home, but not always a refuge. The expectation is clear. Whatever happens inside these walls stays here. The outside world must never see the cracks. The stories told here, around the table by the fire before sleep, are not of grand victories or noble quests. They are lessons, reminders, warnings. Respect your elders. Honour the house. Bear your burdens with dignity. In these tales, the sufferer is always the hero. The mother who endures her husband's moods, the daughter who holds her tongue, the son who takes blame to spare a younger sibling. The message is soft, almost gentle, but it tightens like a noose. To suffer in silence is the mark of the truly honourable. You see how shame weaves itself into every aspect of life. If a wife is struck, it is her shame, not her husband's. If a child is beaten, the family must make sure the neighbours don't hear. If a servant is dismissed, her story is quickly spun into one of failure. She wasn't grateful, she didn't fit in, she made trouble. The shame never stains the master's name. It rolls downhill, coming to rest on the one least able to carry it. Historians still debate whether this was cruelty by design, or simply a society doing its best to keep order. Some point to the endless sermons about patience and virtue, the stories of saints who suffered and were sanctified. Others argue that the stories themselves were a kind of armour, protecting those at the top from facing the harm done beneath them. You listen to the way people speak of trouble as something to be survived, not solved. A mother tells her daughter, "It could always be worse. Count your blessings." A father tells his son, "Real men don't complain." A neighbour's sorrow is met with a brisk nod, then quickly swept away with a joke or a change of subject. In the rare moments when someone does try to speak out, the response is swift and sharp. Why shame the family? Why invite trouble? The lesson is reinforced. To endure without complaint is a kind of heroism. You see it most painfully in the stories whispered between women. At the well, in the market, while sewing by the fading light, they share hints and warnings. Keep your voice down. Don't draw attention. If your husband is angry, give him space. If someone in the manor stares too long, avoid him. There is advice for every danger, but rarely any promise of help. The message is always the same: survive, but do not speak. If you ask after a woman who has disappeared, the answer is vague. She went to stay with family, or she's ill, or she married a merchant in another town. The truth, if she was cast out or fled from harm or simply couldn't take it anymore, is known only to a handful and never spoken above a whisper. Even the children sense these gaps, learning early which questions never to ask. You hear, too, the jokes that serve as camouflage for pain. The wife who nags gets no supper, someone quips at the tavern, laughter covering discomfort. A silent woman is a blessing, replies another. The humour is brittle as old parchment. Even the priest, in his homily, hints that a wife's patience is her greatest virtue, and that a husband's temper is merely a trial sent by God. The laughter never quite reaches the eyes of those who have learned what it costs to keep the peace. In rare moments, someone tries to break the pattern. A girl refuses to apologise for a broken dish. A servant speaks out when she is wronged. A mother stands up to her husband for the sake of her child. Sometimes these acts are met with respect, more often with scorn, or worse, with swift retribution. The courage to speak is admired in stories, but in life it is punished more often than rewarded. Historians still argue whether the cult of silent suffering created resilience or just resignation. They point to the letters written in cramped script, hidden in the hems of dresses, where women confess to despair and loneliness. You see too how the suffering hero is celebrated, especially if they never complain. The mother who dies young is called an angel of patience. The wife who loses her voice to illness is remembered as blessedly gentle. Even the child who wastes away is praised for never being any trouble. These stories offer comfort, but also reinforce the idea that pain is noble and protest is shameful. Yet, beneath the surface, you notice tiny rebellions. A wife who teaches her daughter to hide coins for an escape. A son who takes the blame for a sibling's mistake, but whispers encouragement in the dark. A neighbour who leaves bread at a window, never asking questions. These acts don't change the world, but they carve out pockets of safety in a place that demands so much silence. The line between shame and blame blurs until they are one and the same. A family's misfortune is seen as a reflection of its worth. If a daughter is sent home, the mother is blamed for poor upbringing. If a son runs away, the father is shamed for being too soft or too harsh. The stories passed from mouth to mouth become warnings. Don't be too loud, too proud, too different. Blend in, bear your burdens, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be spared. You hear of a girl, clever and kind, who is dismissed from the manor for impertinence. In truth, she spoke out when accused unfairly, refusing to bow her head. Her story is retold with a shake of the head. Such a pity, but she brought it on herself. The next servant learns to bite her tongue, to let injustice slide, to choose silence over truth. The pattern holds. At the church door, the priest preaches about the virtue of humility. He tells the congregation that suffering in silence brings one closer to God, that those who endure without protest will be rewarded in heaven. The faces in the pews are sombre. You sense that the words offer more comfort to those who demand endurance than to those who must provide it. Historians still search for moments when shame failed to hold its grip, when someone spoke out, when a wrong was righted, when suffering was acknowledged instead of hidden. There are stories of miracles. A woman who flees to a convent and finds peace. A boy who runs away and makes a life in the city. But for every happy ending, there are dozens more where silence is the only safety. You sit in the candlelight as the house quiets for the night, listening to the soft sounds of breathing, the creak of settling timbers, the distant cry of an owl. The peace feels fragile, won at a high cost. You wonder how many stories are buried here, how many dreams smothered, how much pain hidden for the sake of keeping up appearances. Before sleep comes, you imagine a world where heroism means more than silent suffering, where speaking the truth brings not shame but healing, where kindness is louder than fear, where every voice matters. In the hush, hope stirs. Perhaps tomorrow someone will dare to speak. The village, you notice, isn't always as solemn as the stories and sermons suggest. Sometimes laughter bubbles up in the strangest places, slipping through the cracks of daily hardship like sunlight in a ruined roof. If you rise before dawn and listen at the edge of the green, you might hear it. The bark of a market woman, the squabble of boys over a game, even the tired giggle of the scullery maids as they trade secrets with sooty hands. In the dim light, everyone looks the same, tired, hopeful, longing for a moment's relief. And sometimes relief comes in the form of a joke. It's during fairs and feast days, though, that humour struts out into the open, bold and painted and loud. In the centre of the square, amid banners and the sweet sour smell of spilled ale, stands the jester, motley clad, cap jingling, his face a mask of red and white. He's the only person in the village, or maybe the entire county, who can mock the Lord, poke fun at the priest, or call out the foibles of the village reeve without risking the stocks. He does so with a wink and a grin, and the crowd roars. The jester's freedom is both a shield and a trap. He can say almost anything, as long as he pretends not to mean it. You watch as he juggles turnips and tells a story about a lord so vain that his horse refused to be seen with him. The crowd howls, and even the lord standing at the edge must laugh along. Beneath the surface, though, you sense a tension. Every jest is a test, every laugh a little too loud. The jester's role is to say what others cannot, to poke holes in the village's pride, but always to step back before the laughter turns dangerous. There's power here, but it's as fragile as spun glass. Humour is everywhere in medieval life, often sharp-edged and cruel. It's a way to let off steam, to bond, but also a way to keep others in their place. The apprentice who trips over his tools is greeted with a hail of mock applause. The plump baker is teased about sampling too much wares. A woman with a limp is given a nickname that sticks for life. Sometimes the laughter is affectionate, but often it hides discomfort, even malice. Jokes are a way to say what can't be said openly, a kind of permission slip for cruelty. Historians still debate whether this humour was a coping mechanism or a subtle form of protest. Some argue that jesters and fools were the pressure valves of the social order, giving voice to truths that would otherwise explode. Others see only another method of keeping people in their place. If you can laugh at someone, you don't have to take them seriously. In either case, the stories of fools and jesters reveal the deep unease that runs beneath the medieval dream of order and honour. You follow the jester after the show, watching him shed his motley in the shadows behind the tavern. Here, he's just another man, tired, his face creased with care. He laughs with the kitchen boys, shares bread with a beggar, and, when he thinks no one is listening, mutters prayers for the mother he hasn't seen in years. Even the joker needs comfort. You realise that laughter is often the bravest mask of all, worn to protect wounds that never heal. The stories the jester tells are often true in their way. He mocks the lord for his vanity, but everyone knows the lord's temper is dangerous. He jokes about the priest's fondness for wine, but never mentions the confessions that haunt the priest's sleep. The fool's wisdom is that he knows where the lines are drawn and how to dance right up to them without falling over. You notice how much of medieval humour is about power, who has it, who doesn't, and who can get away with mocking whom. The village idiot, or natural fool, is both pitied and protected. He can say things no one else can, but only because no one takes him seriously. If he ever crosses the wrong person, even the smallest slip can be punished harshly. There's a particular story told every spring festival. The jester stands before the crowd and holds up a mirror, inviting anyone to come and see the greatest fool in the village. One by one, brave souls approach, and the jester asks a sly question. What would you change about your life if you could? The answers are always safe. More land, a new cow, a prettier wife, and everyone laughs. But when the widow steps forward and says quietly, "I'd want to be heard," the laughter falters. For a moment the crowd is silent and the jester bows low. That, dear friends, he says, is the wisdom of fools. The moment passes, but something lingers. Humour is a double-edged sword in the manner as well. The lord keeps a fool at court, a sharp-tongued man with a gift for rhyme. He's allowed to tease the lady about her needlework, the steward about his appetite, the knight about his hair. But if he ever mentions the bruises on the servant girl's arm, or the hush that falls when the master enters the kitchen, he is quickly silenced. Some truths are never funny. You notice too how jokes are used to keep people in line. A girl who laughs too loudly is called forward. A boy who cries is nicknamed Ladybird. If a woman is bold, she's the butt of the feast day story. If a man fails, he is mocked for weeks. The line between teasing and cruelty is thin, and the cost of misjudging it can be harsh. Sometimes laughter is the only weapon left to the powerless. The maids joke about the steward's bald spot. The apprentices make faces behind the master's back. The old women at the well swap stories about the priest's sermons. These moments of rebellion are small, but they matter. They remind everyone that suffering is not the whole story. Historians still argue whether fools were ever truly free. Some became trusted advisors, even friends to kings. Others were thrown aside the moment their jokes cut too close. The chronicles are full of fools who vanished after one wrong word, or whose laughter masked 1,000 sorrows. Yet the fool's legacy remains, a reminder that humour can be a weapon and a balm, a shield and a mirror. You sit at the edge of a wedding feast, watching as the jester spins tales of love gone wrong, of husbands who snore and wives who gossip, of children who know more than their parents suspect. The guests roar with laughter, their cares forgotten for a moment. Yet, when the bride's eyes fill with tears, the jester shifts, telling a story of a maiden who runs away to find her fortune, who returns to the village with tales of wonders and riches. The laughter is softer now, gentler, a promise that stories can heal as well as wound. Later you wander through the empty square, the banners drooping, the air heavy with the scent of spilled wine and trampled grass. The world feels lighter, as if laughter has swept the dust from every corner. Yet, beneath the surface, the old hurts remain. The jester limps home, his bells silent, his face thoughtful. You wonder how many tears are hidden behind the mask, how much pain is wrapped in the warmth of laughter. You return to the manor, where the servants gather in the kitchen, sharing the day's best jokes. Even here the humour is tinged with sadness. A girl teases her friend for blushing at the sight of a handsome stable boy. But her laughter falters when the housekeeper scolds them for idleness. The boys boast of daring feats, but quiet when the steward enters, remembering the sting of his tongue. As night deepens, you lie in your narrow bed, listening to the faint echoes of laughter drifting through the halls. You realise that humour, in this world, is both a survival skill and a secret language, a way to name what can't be spoken, to bear what can't be changed. It is not always kind, but it is always true. Before you drift off, let yourself imagine a world where every joke is gentle, every laugh is shared, where humour never hides hurt but always brings healing. For now, though, laughter is as complex as life itself, a bright thread in the dark tapestry, a flicker of hope in the long medieval night. Dawn on a market day brings a kind of performance to the medieval village, one not set upon a stage but right at the heart of the square, where law and punishment become a spectacle for all. You rise to the sound of bells and distant shouts, the air charged with an uneasy excitement. Justice here isn't quiet or private. It's a public act, a reminder to everyone watching of what happens when someone steps out of the line, or simply loses their place in the story. As you join the crowd that's already gathering in the square, you feel the restless tension. See neighbours pressing together, baskets forgotten, eyes searching for the best view. There's a rumour, someone's being punished today. It could be a thief, a gossip, a woman accused of witchcraft, or a young man caught poaching on the Lord's land. The details are hazy, the anticipation sharp. In a world where secrets are currency, nothing is more fascinating than someone else's shame brought into the open. You notice the structures meant for these rituals. The stocks, splintered and worn smooth by countless heads and hands. The pillory with its iron hinges and lingering stink. Sometimes even the scaffold, stark against the sky. There are lesser punishments too. A dunking stool by the river for scolding wives, a simple whipping post for minor offences. Justice, here, is meant to be seen and heard and never forgotten. The lord and his retinue arrive with a flourish, the bailiff unrolling a parchment, reading out the offence in a voice meant to carry to the very edge of the crowd. You watch the accused stand, trembling or defiant, forced to face not only the judgment of the law, but the eyes of every neighbour, every enemy, every so-called friend. Punishment is not just about pain or penance. It's about stripping away any last shreds of dignity. Historians still argue whether public justice was meant to deter or simply to entertain. Some say it kept order, a necessary reminder that actions have consequences. Others see only cruelty, humiliation doled out as theatre, the powerful flexing their muscle at the expense of the weak. You see both truths shimmering in the morning sun, the villagers' faces hungry for drama, but also wary, hoping their own secrets never find the light. Today the stocks are occupied by a young woman. Her crime, speaking disrespectfully of her betters. Her mother stands to the side, tears leaking silently, while children throw rotten apples and the old men murmur about the good old days. The bailiff reads her sentence again, slower, drawing out the moment. Her shame becomes everyone's lesson. When the church bells ring for noon, she is finally released, her cheeks stained with fruit and tears, her reputation forever marked. The spectacle of justice isn't limited to minor offences. Sometimes a case grips the entire village for weeks, an accusation of theft, a neighbour caught in adultery, a stranger accused of sorcery. Each trial becomes a kind of pageant. Witnesses are called, each with their own grudges and alliances, while the accused stands helpless, knowing that every word spoken will echo through the village long after the punishment is done. You see how public justice is a kind of warning, but also a powerful silencer. To be accused, to be dragged in front of the village, is a fate worse than the punishment itself. Most people will do anything to avoid such exposure, including hiding their own suffering, or the suffering of others. Victims are often warned, don't make trouble, or we'll all pay the price. So the cycle continues, pain hidden behind polite smiles and lowered eyes. Punishment is sometimes a spectacle of mercy as well. The Lord might generously reduce a sentence, sparing a servant from a beating, or a family from a fine. The crowd murmurs approval, eager to believe in justice's kindness. But even this mercy is a show, another way to remind everyone who holds power, and whose favour must be curried. Children learn the rules early. You see them at play, setting up their own mock stocks, inventing crimes, deciding who must be shamed and who may walk free. The lesson is absorbed before they can even read. The worst thing isn't pain, but public disgrace. Historians find court records filled with cases that end in silence rather than spectacle. Sometimes a wrong is simply settled out of sight, a fine paid, a marriage arranged, a child sent away. These private punishments are quieter, but just as devastating. When public justice is so harsh, it's safer for the powerful to handle their own business behind closed doors. Yet there are moments when public spectacle reveals more than it conceals. During the annual assizes, when royal judges travel from town to town, cases are heard in bulk, crimes and grievances paraded for all to see. For a brief moment, the entire village becomes both jury and audience. Accusers and accused stand side by side, each hoping their version of the story will win sympathy, or at least escape notice. The judge's gavel falls, and with it comes closure for some, but lasting bitterness for many. You notice that for women, public punishment carries a special terror. The dunking stool is used mostly for those accused of gossip, slander, or witchcraft, crimes as slippery as smoke. Once, a young wife is accused of spreading rumours about the manor steward. The bailiff ties her to the stool and plunges her into the muddy river again and again. Each time she emerges gasping, the crowd jeers. The message is clear. Women's words are dangerous and must be kept in check. Afterward, she keeps to herself, her laughter silenced, her spirit dimmed. For men, the shame is often in the stocks or the pillory. Days spent exposed to ridicule, unable to defend themselves, their families forced to beg for mercy or food. Sometimes the punishment is meant as a lesson for others. More often, it serves to satisfy a thirst for spectacle, a brief relief from the monotony and hardship of daily life. Occasionally, a punishment goes too far. The village still remembers the time a thief was flogged nearly to death for stealing bread. The story is retold with varying details. Some say he was innocent, others claim he confessed. The only certainty is the hush that falls whenever his name is spoken, and the wary glances cast at the stocks on misty mornings. The system is built on shame, and the shame sticks long after the bruises fade. A girl forced to wear a sign for immodesty finds her marriage prospects wither. A man branded as a drunkard loses his standing no matter how hard he tries to redeem himself. Families move away, names are forgotten, pain is swept under the rushes. Everyone is reminded, there but for the grace of God go I. Even church discipline is public. Penitents are sometimes made to stand at the altar in sackcloth, heads bowed, sins proclaimed to the congregation. Some weep openly, others burn with rage. The intent is to cleanse, to forgive, but the scars of exposure rarely heal. Historians still argue whether such harsh justice kept peace or simply bred more secrecy. Some see evidence of compassion, punishments commuted, wrongs righted, villagers rallying to protect a friend. Others see only the countless stories left untold, the victims who never dared speak, the wrongs never named for fear of what would follow. You see small mercies in the way the community sometimes shields its own. If a neighbour is to be punished, friends might slip bread to her children or distract the bailiff long enough for her to catch her breath. After the spectacle is over, women gather to wash the wounds, to share quiet words of comfort. These gestures don't erase the pain, but they soften the harshness of a world that prizes spectacle over compassion. As night falls, the square empties. The stocks stand empty, but their presence lingers, a reminder that justice here is always watching. You walk home with the hush of the crowd still in your ears, the taste of shame sharp and bitter. The village sleeps, but the fear of exposure remains. Before sleep finds you, imagine a world where justice is gentle, where wrongs are made right in private, where no one's pain is turned into a show. For now, the shadows of the pillory and the stocks stretch long, but hope, quiet and stubborn, waits for the dawn. You leave behind the echoes of the village square, the bitter taste of public punishment, and make your way toward the outskirts of the medieval town, where the land rolls gentle and quiet. Here, beyond the clamour, stone walls rise from the earth in perfect order. A convent, a monastery, a house set apart from the world. The hush of the cloister feels like a balm at first, a promise that within these walls the wounded may find shelter and peace. But you soon sense the truth. Sanctuary is never quite as simple as it seems. Every holy space is haunted by the lives that seek refuge there, and some wounds are slow to heal. The convent bell rings before sunrise. Inside, the nuns rise from hard cots, the chill of morning swirling in the air. Each day is ordered by prayer, work, silence, a rhythm as old as the stones themselves. You watch them file through the cloisters in a hush, faces shrouded, voices a low murmur. For many, the convent is a refuge. Daughters sent by families too poor to provide dowries, widows who have lost their way, girls seeking shelter from a world that offers them little mercy. Yet within the order and calm, stories murmur just beneath the surface. Some come here to escape violence or shame, fleeing a father's temper, a husband's fists, or the wagging tongues of the village. Some arrive already carrying pain so heavy it can barely be spoken. The walls are thick, but memory seeps through like winter rain. In another town, a storm floods the river, destroys the mill, ruins half the crops. That night a woman is accused of casting a look at the water. She's a healer, yes, but also a foreigner, widowed young, childless, sharp-tongued. The community doesn't need evidence. They need someone to blame. By week's end, she's gone. Some say she fled. Others say the priest gave her a choice. Either way, no one says her name again. You notice how outsiders are allowed in just enough to be useful. A Roma man is welcome to shoe horses, but he must camp outside the walls. A Jewish merchant may lend silver, but must wear a badge on his tunic. A Moorish doctor might save a lord's life, but is not invited to the feast. The double standard is clear. You may serve, but never truly belong. You hear jokes told in the tavern. The travelling minstrel with the crooked teeth, the Lombard with his strange coin, the girl from the east who bewitched a monk. The laughter is thin, uneasy. These stories are warnings disguised as humour. If you are different, you are dangerous. If you speak out, you are a threat. If you succeed, you are suspect. Even within a village, outsider status can cling like a second skin. A child born out of wedlock, a servant who rose too far, a stranger who married into a local family. You see it in the way people pause before saying their names, in the sideways glances, in the way kindness is rationed out like bread during famine. Sometimes the scapegoating turns deadly. The chronicles tell of towns that burned entire communities, Jews accused of poisoning wells, women called witches, heretics hunted for daring to read scripture aloud. In 14th century Strasbourg, hundreds of Jews were burned alive during the Black Death, blamed for the plague's spread. No proof was offered, none asked for. Fear was enough. Yet in other places, quiet resistance blooms. A village hides a traveller during a pogrom. A priest defends a midwife against accusations. A guild secretly admits a skilled foreign craftsman. These moments don't undo the harm, but they complicate the story. Even in the darkest places, someone remembers how to be human. You pass a pilgrim on the road, his feet blistered, his robe stained. He carries no coin, only a scallop shell and a letter of blessing. The villagers give him bread, but not their trust. He sleeps in a stable, preaches at the edge of the market, is gone by morning. Later, someone's goat goes missing, and his name is whispered with suspicion. The road protects no one. In the monastery, the scribe copies stories of saints who welcome the stranger, Christ in disguise, the angel at the door. But in the village, strangers are mostly kept at a distance. The contradiction is never resolved. Historians still dig through letters and ledgers, searching for signs of inclusion. A Jewish physician who served 5 kings, a Moorish scholar who taught Latin to monks, a Roma child baptized with the mayor's name, but these stories are rare. More often, the record is of fines, restrictions, expulsions. You begin to notice how fear of the outsider shapes even the built environment. Walls grow higher, gates are watched, curfews enforced. Foreigners must register with the reeve, sometimes pay extra to trade. Inside, suspicion is encouraged. If your neighbour speaks oddly, ask the priest. If the traveller won't name his town, report him to the bailiff. Trust becomes a luxury only afforded to those born within earshot of the same bell tower. Yet the village depends on the outsider more than it will admit. Spices, cloth, books, news, all arrive on the backs of travellers. Midwives learn techniques from women across borders. Monks transcribe text from Arabic, Hebrew, Greek. Even the parish church sings hymns imported from distant lands. The contradiction is deep and enduring. The outsider is both feared and needed, blamed and envied, scapegoated and relied upon. And when something goes wrong, a storm, a fire, a harvest gone sour, the outsider is the first name shouted, the first door knocked upon with fists instead of greetings. You hear the quiet warning a mother gives her child. Don't stare at the blacksmith's wife. She's not from here. The girl nods, though she doesn't understand why it matters. She will, soon enough. Sometimes being an outsider is a matter of survival. A woman who cannot bear more children moves to a new town where no one knows. A man accused of theft starts over as a healer. A child orphaned by plague is taken in and renamed. In the gaps of memory and the blur of borders, some are lucky enough to reinvent themselves. Others are never allowed to forget. There's a peculiar irony, too, in how the medieval world worships saints who are outsiders. Mary Magdalene, misunderstood and maligned. St. Martin, the Roman soldier who gave his cloak to a beggar. St. Christopher, whose name means Christ-bearer, is often depicted as a giant, monstrous in form, yet carrying salvation across the river. The Church teaches compassion, but fear often speaks louder than faith. You rest one evening near the woods, by a campfire shared with a Roma family. They speak of moving on at first light before the sheriff stirs. One of the older women, her voice rough but kind, tells you, "We go where we are needed and we leave before we're feared." Her laughter is hollow, wise. The children curl up by the fire, the horses sigh. They will be gone by sunrise, leaving barely a trace. Before you drift off, imagine a world where difference invites curiosity, not suspicion. Where no one is judged for the colour of their skin, the sound of their voice, or the place of their birth. A world where strangers are welcome not with warnings but with warmth. The road ahead is long, but even now, under the same stars, you carry the hope that such a world might one day come. By now you've walked through courts and cloisters, village greens and riverbanks, and with each step you've seen how much pain, silence, and hidden harm have lived beneath the surface of what's called honour. But now you arrive at a stranger place still, not a place at all, but a gap, a blank, a silence so vast it echoes. You sit in the scriptorium of a monastery, where a monk with ink-stained hands copies words onto stretched vellum by candlelight. These are the chronicles, the histories, the lists of kings and deeds and storms and wars. You watch as he writes down the name of a new lord, the damage done by a fire, the feast thrown in honour of a saint. The script flows smooth and proud, but what's missing is louder than what's there. You look for mention of the woman accused and never seen again, of the girl whose bruises were never named, of the servant who disappeared in winter. The pages are silent. This is the great lie of history, that it tells the whole story. Historians still argue about what gets preserved and what gets forgotten. They dig into archives, read the margins of ledgers, study court cases where only the verdict remains. Sometimes they find a hint, made dismissed for dishonour, woman buried without rights, child sent away to cousins. But the truth is that most stories of harm, especially those of the powerless, never made it to ink at all. You examine the manor rolls, lists of rents paid, fines collected, disputes over pigs and fences. These records are rich with detail and empty of lives. No mention of fear, no accounting of grief. The record keepers weren't tasked with empathy. Their job was to protect power, to preserve what mattered to the people in charge. And what mattered was land, loyalty and legacy, not the tears of a girl behind a barn, or the bruises covered by long sleeves, or the silences enforced in a convent's back hall. You move on to court records. At first they seem promising. Here is a woman who brings a case against a neighbour who wronged her. Here is a servant accusing a master of mistreatment. But then you see the patterns. Most cases are dismissed. The language is clipped, biased, full of words like scandal, immodesty, outburst. The accused men are named with titles. The accusers are woman of ill fame, maid known for talk. Even when they win, the cost is steep. Reputation, safety, home, and many never dared come forward at all. They knew better. They knew the price of speaking was higher than the pain of silence. You turn to parish records, baptisms, marriages, deaths. Occasionally, there's a line that catches you. Child found dead, mother unknown, burial refused. Woman confessed with great distress, and then nothing more, as if the story begins and ends in a moment. But people don't work like that. Pain echoes. It ripples outward, across years, across generations. Even the saints' lives, written in careful Latin, are scrubbed clean. The martyrs suffer nobly. The women are pious, silent, pure. No messy realities, no contradictions, no mention of the human toll it takes to live in a world that sees pain as punishment and silence as virtue. And what about the art? You peer at tapestries and woodcuts and manuscript margins. Sometimes, in the corner, you see something strange. A woman with a swollen eye, a child hiding under a table, a monk with a wolf's head. The official meaning is allegory, but perhaps these are the whispered confessions of artists who saw what history refused to write. You sit beside a historian working in a dim archive, fingers tracing faded ink. They look up at you and say, "What we have is a skeleton. We don't know how it breathed." And you understand then. History isn't a truth. It's a collage made by survivors with pens. And the survivors weren't always the ones who suffered most. And so much was destroyed. By fire, by war, by time, by people who wanted certain stories gone. There are entire archives lost in sieges, floods, revolutions. What remained was often what the powerful wanted to remain. And even now the absence echoes. When modern historians read a record that says, "May dismissed in disgrace," they know what might lie beneath it, but they cannot prove it, and so the silence holds. Historians still argue, should we imagine what we've lost? Should we try to reconstruct stories that were never written down? Some say no, facts only. Others say we owe it to the silence to tell their stories, even if only by inference, even if only by surrounding the absence with everything we do know and letting the silence speak for itself. And in that silence you start to hear a shape. You picture a girl, no name in the records, whose life mattered just as much as any lord's. She sang as she carried water, she laughed once at a feast. She was hurt by someone trusted, and she told no one, because she knew what would happen if she did. You picture a servant boy who left his village with nothing but a pack and a scar. No one recorded his departure, but he existed. He mattered. His pain shaped the world around him, even if it left no ink behind. You remember the nun who disappeared from the register, the child whose baptism was delayed, the peasant woman whose fines tripled after she refused a certain man's protection. You come across a medieval proverb scribbled in the corner of a legal text. The loudest cries leave no record. No one knows who wrote it. But it feels like truth. Even now you feel the weight of everything that's missing, and yet there's hope too. Because silence is not the same as absence. Just because something wasn't written down doesn't mean it didn't happen. Just because a story was buried doesn't mean it cannot be honoured. You begin to see historians as archaeologists of silence, not just digging through dirt but through gaps, reading between the lines, sensing what's missing as fiercely as what remains. Every blank in a record is a place where a life touched the world. There are whispers in the structure itself. Why was this rule created? Likely because it had to address abuse. Why was this punishment needed? Probably because harm had already occurred. Why did the law protect the master more than the maid? Because it was afraid of what might happen if she were allowed to speak. The structures of power are shaped by the very harm they claim to prevent, and in understanding that, you begin to hear the truth beneath the silence. You return once more to the scriptorium, the monk still bent over his parchment. You ask him, "Do you ever leave things out?" He doesn't look up, just mutters, "Sometimes to protect the living. Sometimes because no one wants to know. But you want to know." And that is where healing begins, not in uncovering every secret, not in proving every harm, but in simply acknowledging that what is missing matters. That the stories untold deserve as much reverence as the ones gilded and bound. You close your eyes in that quiet room surrounded by parchment and ink and the breath of centuries. You remember all the voices that never made it into the books, and you promise, gently, to yourself, that you will listen harder, that you will carry the silences as carefully as the songs. Before you drift off, let yourself imagine a world where every story is preserved, where no one is erased, where silence is never forced but freely chosen. A world where memory is wide enough to hold everyone, even those history forgot. You rise with a mist curling at your feet, the first hint of morning creeping over thatched rooftops and crooked stone chimneys. The world you've wandered through, of cloisters, courtrooms, secrets, and scars, feels both heavy and hauntingly familiar. But today something is shifting in the air, not in triumph, not yet, but in restlessness, in murmur, in that ancient quivering hope that silence might one day shatter, not in violence, but in truth. The final chapter of medieval life's cruel order wasn't written in stone. It moved through whispers, through little acts of resistance, through the moments when someone, usually someone small, someone disregarded, chose not to follow the script. You see it in the kitchen maid who sings too loudly, though the steward glares, in the shepherd boy who teaches a village girl to write her name in the dirt, in the wife who finally, one evening, locks the door before her husband returns from the tavern. Tiny moments, but they press like fingertips against the great wall of silence. These moments don't change the laws. They don't stop the cruel priest or the violent lord or the endless sermons about patience and obedience. But they remind you, people are not only what the world says they are. They carry within them a resistance so quiet, so stubborn, that even the church bells cannot drown it out. You walk now through a market where women haggle boldly, their sleeves rolled up, their eyes sharp. You see a young girl reading aloud in a corner while the baker rolls dough beside her. In the shadows of the well, a group of wives exchange knowing glances. "Don't let them fool you," one mutters. "We've always known what they do. We've just had to survive it." Historians still argue whether medieval women had any real agency. But you've seen it, haven't you? In the hidden letters, in the whispered warnings, in the way the world bent slightly around the ones who refused to bend themselves. You pass a scribal workshop in a city that's beginning to buzz with trade. A woman sits at a desk. Yes, a woman. Copying not just prayers or laws, but stories. Fables. Tales with clever girls and kind-hearted fools and wicked men brought low by their own arrogance. The ink is dark, the parchment smooth, and the smile at the corner of her mouth tells you she knows what she's doing. Every word is a resistance. You see songs beginning to change. Ballads once sung about brave knights and chaste ladies now include women who rescue themselves. You hear lullabies with lines about clever daughters and gentle sons. These aren't revolutions, but they are seeds. And seeds grow. In the city, a midwife begins keeping records, not just of births, but of what women tell her. Who's hurting, who's scared, who needs help. Her notes are coded, hidden in recipes or herbal margins. But they are there. She is preserving lives beneath the guise of medicine. You glimpse a servant who tells her mistress she will not go to the steward's room tonight. Her voice is quiet, but it holds. The mistress does not stop her. In the port, you meet a woman who wears trousers and sails with a crew who know better than to ask questions. She tells you she's been called every name under the sun, but she sleeps easier now than she ever did in the manor house. Her silence was taken from her long ago, so now she chooses noise, laughter, swearing, singing. Her voice is raw and real. You walk into a tavern where a girl with a bruised wrist pours ale with her left hand. A new girl watches her nervously. When no one's looking, she slips a knife under the girl's skirt. Small, rusted, sharp. No words, just a glance, and in that glance, solidarity. The stories don't end in victory. This isn't a fairy tale. The powerful still sit on their chairs of carved oak. The laws still favour those who write them. The sermons still thunder. But beneath the surface, women and men alike are learning to doubt the idea that suffering in silence is holy. They're beginning to wonder, what if honour is just a name they gave to fear? You hear a rumour that spreads faster than grain prices. A lady in the north left her estate to her maid, claiming she was more kin than blood ever made. It causes a scandal, but the papers were sealed. The land transfers. The maid plants herbs where the roses used to be. Even the clergy begin to crack. A young priest writes a treatise arguing that confession should be abolished because it gives predators too much power. He's banished, of course. But his words are copied, hidden in prayer books, passed between hands like treasure. At the edge of the forest, you find an old woman tending bees. She tells you stories of the women who came to her over the years, girls who ran away, wives who couldn't bear another winter, daughters whose bruises wouldn't fade. "I don't judge," she says. "I just give them honey and fire." She shows you a book, her own, handwritten, full of herbs, spells, names. It's not just a record, it's a rebellion. And in all this you realise the real end of the medieval silence didn't come with a trumpet or a sword or a king's decree. It came in rooms like these, in hands like these, in words written when no one expected them. Even now, historians flip pages and sometimes find a line out of place. A servant woman whose name was preserved, a court case where a peasant girl's testimony led to a lord's fine, a nun who defied a bishop and was never punished. Each of these is a fracture in the wall, and the cracks grow wider. The printing press arrives like a thunderclap in the late 15th century. Suddenly more voices begin to slip through the cracks. Not just kings and clerics, but thinkers, rebels, poets, and yes, women. Books that once would have been burned are now duplicated, passed hand to hand. Ideas long whispered in corners are read aloud in kitchens. You walk into a home where a girl reads a page to her grandmother. The old woman listens, weeping quietly. The girl doesn't know why, but you do. She's hearing her own thoughts in someone else's words, for the first time in her life. You stand now on the threshold of change. The medieval world is not gone. It lingers in law, in culture, in the quiet pull towards shame and silence. But the door is open, just a crack, and that's all it takes. You look back one last time at the convent, the stocks, the scriptorium, the whispered names, the unmarked graves, the empty pages, and then you turn forward. Because what happens next? Well, that's the part you get to help write. The fire burns lower now. Outside, the wind is gentle, brushing against the shutters like a soft sigh. You can still hear the echoes of all the stories we told tonight. Echoes of loss, of fear, of things hidden in the name of honour, but also echoes of courage, of whispers that became words, of words that became actions. History isn't made only by kings or armies. It's made in kitchens, in corners, in beds where someone chooses to speak instead of stay silent, in hands that hold instead of strike, in the smallest acts of defiance, the kind no one sees but that change everything. You don't have to fix the world. You don't have to fight it all at once. Just carry this knowing with you. The silences were real, but they were never right. And every time you listen, really listen to someone's pain, you break the pattern a little more. So now, as you lie back, let the darkness be gentle. Let your breathing slow. Let the voices fade into hush. You are not alone. Others have walked this path, hurt and healed. Others have been silenced, but found ways to sing. And you? You're part of that story now. Sleep easy, brave soul. You've heard the quiet truth of history, and the world is a little more awake for it. Sweet dreams.